This is a special feature produced for download from ABC Classic FM's website. Due to copyright restrictions on the music, it's been edited to make this possible.
Damien Beaumont with you on ABC Classic FM until 1. In 1861, Prosper Meniere published the classic account of the disease which now bears his name. His account was amazingly clear and comprehensive. He described a condition which was characterized by sudden and recurring attacks of vertigo associated with nausea and vomiting, together with hearing loss, tinnitus, and a blocked-up feeling in the affected ear. Between attacks, the sufferers are in good health, but the problem is attacks come on suddenly, so for people with Menieres, life can be full of anxiety and uncertainty. There are thought to be some 50,000 Menieres sufferers in Australia today. Professor Bill Gibson has been researching this disease all his medical career. He's been trying to unravel its medical mysteries. Professor Gibson spoke with Margaret Throsby in May of last year. His music choices included a contribution from one of his grandchildren, but his first choice of music was by Beethoven.
The opening of what's known as the Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven, and we hear the pianist Gerard Willems playing it on this occasion, and chosen by our guest today, Professor Bill Gibson. Good morning.
Good morning, Margaret.
Welcome back to our program.
Thank you.
You were one of our first interviews, I think, about 16 years ago.
That's it, yes, on a different subject, but it was very enjoyable.
Different but related, but tell me about that. Where does that take you?
When we met, I was struggling to get the cochlear implant program up and running in New South Wales. We were literally asking for money from any source we could so that we could offer implants to children who were born deaf and to adults if appropriate. We had one of your listeners phone in at the end of the program and actually donated a cochlear implant to a little boy called Callum.
Whoa!
And they said they were going to buy themselves a sofa. Yeah. But on their way, they were listening to your program and they thought, we'll do without the sofa. Callum needs his hearing.
And he got
And
it.
he certainly does, because he's done fantastic ever since he's heard it.
Fabulous.
He's very good.
Bill, why the Moonlight Sonata?
Well, that's probably one of my earliest childhood memories. We had a grand piano in the main drawing room of the house, and my grandmother used to play it, and she taught my sister, who was also much more musically inclined than me, to play it. And I can remember so many times hearing that tune coming up the stairway to where we were playing. It brings back a lot of memories.
Yeah, you'd either end up hating it or loving it, and obviously you don't hate it.
I like it,
yeah.
Yes. The other one she used to play was the Funeral March, but I thought I'd spare you that, by Chopin. Yeah.
Let's get a picture of Meniere's disease first. At what age does it usually appear?
Usually it appears in middle life, so the peak instance is between 40 and 50. Some people get it younger and some people get it older, but the majority of people, it's in their middle age that they get it, often when they're really struggling to support their families.
Do you see it across cultures, across races, and in both genders?
It's much commoner in European people. Fair-skinned, blue-eyed people, they say, have got the commonest instance of it, which is interesting because it's very similar to MS. Multiple sclerosis has a similar distribution. It's quite rare in Negro-type races. Aboriginals, I've only had 2 that have had that. And
Asians?
Asians, yes, quite common in Japan.
What about men and women equally?
Pretty well equal.
What's the youngest patient or person you've ever seen?
Was 9 years of age, which was terrible. Yes,
how long has it been?
Spoiled her whole childhood. Yeah.
How long has it been recognised as a disease in its own right?
It was recognised by Prosper Meniere, as you mentioned in your introduction, who was a Frenchman and described it in 1861. he died a couple of years later, and nobody thought he was saying anything that made sense. His work was not recognised till about 15 years later, and then they suddenly realised that he was bang on the nail, and they've named the condition after him.
What's going on in the inner ear in Menieres?
Well, that's one of the things we need to know a little bit more about. What we found out just before the Second World War was that there's too much fluid in one of the compartments of the ear. And when they discovered that, they thought that this might be a way to treat people. But we've struggled really to know why too much fluid in the ear should have such devastating effects on attacks of dizziness or vertigo. And we're definitely researching that at the moment.
How many compartments are there in the ear?
Well, there's two main compartments. This is the inner ear, and what we call the membranous labyrinth. It contains endolymph, which is a special fluid which is high in potassium, and it's surrounded by another fluid called perilymph, which is very high in sodium.
So there's one that's high in potassium, one that's high in... And they're separated by a membrane.
By a very thin membrane. So it was often thought that ruptures in that membrane could be the reason why they get the attacks of dizziness.
What makes the symptoms worse?
There's a number of things that seem to aggravate it. One of the things that's been fascinating is that if people load themselves up with salt, they can often bring on attacks. So we're wondering why that has that effect. It does bring an increased volume into your body. Stress can do it. So people who are suffering stress may start to get attacks. So we think of hormonal things there. Some ladies before their menstrual periods may put on fluid, and that may precipitate attacks. Some people are allergic to certain foods. Again, it may be that it causes fluid to build up in the body, and certain foods may cause an attack to occur.
Describe an attack.
Well, the best way to describe it would be to strap yourself onto the top of one of the children's roundabouts and then get somebody to turn you for about 2 hours while you're vomiting and feeling sick.
It's as bad as
and
that.
And it's a horrible feeling.
One of my listeners emailed me saying he was a man of in his older years who feels that he's getting past the Menieres, but we'll come to how you arrive at that point. He said it's like walking through a spin dryer. He felt like walking
through or being in it.
Or being in, yes, trying
yes.
to walk through a spin. So you're on a roundabout, you get giddy.
And you can't stop it, and the whole world's turning around. And the best thing you can do is stay absolutely still, because if you move your head at all, it just aggravates the whole thing.
Is the best thing if you stay upright or lie down?
Most people find it better to lie down. But that's difficult. If this thing suddenly occurs when they're walking through the supermarket or wherever, and where do they lie down? Often they're thought to be drunk, and people quite think that they've had too much to drink or something. That's the reason why they're vomiting and staggering all over the place.
Really, it must be ghastly. And it must cause terrific anxiety. If you have a sudden attack, if it comes on without much warning, then you'd be very nervous about going out and shopping, wouldn't you?
Some people are actually restricted to their homes. They won't go outside because they fear that once they get outside they might have an attack.
How often do attacks come?
Very unpredictable. Some people may only get a few attacks each year.
And how long do they last?
Oh, they can last anywhere from about 15 minutes to several hours.
Okay. So it's all over by the day, when the day's over.
Most people at the end of a severe attack still feel unsteady for a day or two, but they don't feel they're turning anymore.
Right. So and there's no sort of, is there any sensation that people that I know who get migraines say that they've learned to sort of understand a certain feeling that comes over them that they're getting. It's not just the onset of a headache, it's a certain sensation. Does this happen in Menieres?
Yes, it can. Sometimes it can be the cochlear or hearing symptoms of Menieres that seem to exacerbate prior to an attack. So they get a feeling of fullness in the ear.
Deafness?
Fullness. It's sort of like you get in an aeroplane where the ear feels blocked up. That increases.
With pain?
Yes. It can, and they also get tinnitus, may increase or change its character, or they may feel that their hearing starts to muffle. And this can sometimes give them maybe 10 minutes of warning that an attack's on the way. A
bit like when you've been in the swimming pool or the surf and you come out and one ear's got
it's
water
full of
in it,
water.
You've got to sort of, jag your head to get it out. Like that sensation.
Absolutely. Yes, that's correct. So when they get those symptoms, if they do get symptoms of warning symptoms, they can at least sit down, and we sometimes give them some medication to stop them being sick.
Right. And I believe there are 3 stages in Menieres. Is this right?
Yes.
Tell me what's meant by that.
Well, the 3 stages, in a way, is my own work adapting a Japanese staging. In the earlier stage of Menieres, the attacks of vertigo usually predominate. So it's a sudden attacks of vertigo, and they don't notice any cochlear symptoms straight away often.
So presumably people at that point might think, I must have very low blood pressure or something.
And they go to hospital, and they're usually seen in the accident emergency. They check they haven't had a heart attack and things like that. And then they give them usually Stamatil or one of those medications intramuscularly or intravenously, and then they send them home.
Okay.
And they think that was a terrible experience. Maybe it was just a labyrinthitis, an infection of the inner ear. But when it happens again and then again, they realise that they've got something more going on.
So that's what happens in stage 1.
Stage 1, your hearing goes down during attacks perhaps, but it comes back to normal.
Mm-hmm. Stage 2?
Stage 2 is where the hearing starts to get impaired. You're still having these nasty attacks of vertigo, but your hearing is impaired and you have the tinnitus in the ear or ringing in the ears, the fullness, etc.
Just in one ear?
Yes, usually it's one ear. About 10% get it in both ears. And some people run through the whole gambit of Menieres in one ear, and then several years later start to have it in the second ear.
Oh, my God. Can it follow a viral illness?
That's one of the theories. Certainly that's one of my own theories, that a viral illness in a susceptible ear sets up the whole paradigm, which becomes Meniere's disease.
So we've gone through stage 1 when you get the dizzy attacks, then
your hearing starts to get affected.
And it doesn't impair your hearing, it comes back. Then stage 2 when the hearing
never recovers to normal.
And once it's gone, hasn't it? I mean, can you recover hearing in your ear or not once it's damaged?
You can use a hearing aid nowadays in these ears if it's not too bad. So a lot of people can benefit from a hearing aid in a Meniere's ear. We used to think this was impossible because of the distortions, but the new digital hearing aids are fantastic, and you can manipulate them and make the hearing worthwhile.
What about stage 3?
Stage 3 is what we call burnout, where the disease has run its course. The person no longer gets the attacks of vertigo because the balance function of the ear has killed itself. So they have very little balance left in the ear.
So they've accommodated in some other way.
Well, they have to balance with the opposite ear and with their eyes and with their joints. So at this stage, they don't get the attacks of vertigo, but their hearing is poor. They have the constant tinnitus and they have the fullness in the ear. You would think that was awful, but many people pray for the day the disease will burn out, and that they say, look, I'm happy not to have the hearing. I just don't want to, every time I go out to a wedding or a function or whatever, suddenly having these attacks of vertigo.
Oh, no, it's just awful. It's hard to imagine. We'll pick up the conversation after your next piece of music, which is a song by Marta Keane called Homeward Bound. Now, tell me about this, Bill.
Well, since I saw you last, I've had a number of grandchildren, and the oldest grandchild is a very good singer, and he was in the Godwana choir that I'm going to mention later. And he's done a number of duets with his friend Jamie. He was actually in the School Spectacular as one of the soloists a year ago. And he did this recording recently, which is a duet.
And his name is?
His name is Jack Begbie.
So Jack Begbie and his friend Jamie and Homeward Bound.
It.
song called Homeward Bound, written by Marta Keenan, sung there in a duet by the grandson of our guest today, Professor Bill Gibson. That's Jack Begbie and his friend Jamie Carroll. That's lovely.
Lovely, thank you.
You must be very proud. Now, Bill, I've got a pretty clear picture from you what Menieres is and what sort of feelings people get when they get it and the symptoms of it, but I want to know how you treat it.
Well, we can treat the symptoms, and we have a number of medications to stop them being sick and to try and stop them vomiting.
Have you got any idea what causes it? Do you think a viral beginning might be?
I think some people may have a predisposition to it because of a slight difference in the structure of the inner ear.
Just by the way, is it in families? Does it run in?
Yes,
okay.
10 or so % of people will have a close relative that also has Menieres disease.
All right. So you think it might be viral in origin, but what else? What other hunches have been suggested?
Oh, well, the original thoughts were it was vascular and it was a kind of migraine affecting the inner ear. So the blood vessels in the inner ear would constrict. This would stop the absorption of the fluid and then lead to the attacks. But there's a number of different theories.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do? I mean, pardon me being ignorant, but what about surgery? Couldn't you just go in there and drain the ear?
Well, that is one of the things we've tried to do. The problem is if you go directly into the inner ear fluids, you always destroy the hearing completely and the hearing function. It's very, very fragile, especially in Menieres.
There's no way you can operate in...
So the way we operate is on a thing called the endolymphatic sac, which is a drainage point of the ear, which we can access, but the results are variable. I believe that the endolymphatic sac has a role in the attack, so I actually end up removing it in some people. And the interesting finding was that if I remove this part of the inner ear, it tends to make the ears burn out or reach that third stage very quickly.
When you say they burn out, does that mean the hearing is completely gone in that ear?
Well, it would be down at least 60 or 70 dB. In some people, it does go worse than that.
And I'm just wondering then, why not operate at an early age? Even if you are destroying the hearing in the ear, you're obviating the need for going through all those attacks as you progress through the stages, aren't you?
That's right. That's why some people will opt for that option.
Oh, do they?
Yes, and they will think, I don't want these attacks anymore. I have an important job. I cannot keep going like this.
So people opt to have that surgery?
So the other alternative is just to cut the balance nerve itself. So not to operate on the ear, but to cut the nerve that, as it leaves the ear and reaches the brainstem,
the auditory
cut the
nerve.
Balance nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Balance nerve.
Try and leave the auditory nerve alone.
Yes.
That has the advantage that it stops the attacks, but it takes out all the balance from one side of the body. And it's not really an option for older people because they can find it really difficult to rebalance if they've lost everything on one side. Nowadays, we try not to do that. We use a thing called gentamicin, which is an antibiotic, and we can inject it into the ear, and it's vestibular toxic. It destroys the vestibular system, but not so much the hearing system.
Right.
And we can titrate that so we can reduce the amount of balance in the ear down to a level where the attacks aren't so bothersome or not affecting them at all.
If the problem is a build-up of fluid, what about diuretics? What about ridding the body of fluid?
Yeah. There's various ways of doing this. One is just to restrict salt. If you restrict salt, you lose body fluid, which is good. So most people with Menieres are very careful about their salt intake. We're actually wanting to do some research to find out just why it is effective in Menieres disease. We think it has an effect on one of the hormones called vasopressin, which affects the amount of fluid you have in your body and in your ear. We also can give diuretics, so we give usually a chlorothiazide or a salt-losing diuretic. That's good, but the only trouble with the diuretics is they have a side effect, and they drop your blood pressure. Some people, if they take too many diuretics when they stand up, they get dizzy and fall over and faint.
Which you're getting the same effect.
No, it's not as bad as the Menieres disease, but definitely they don't want to do that because that's dangerous if they should faint in the middle of the road or something.
Is anybody pursuing the idea of pharmaceutical attacks on this? I mean, I don't know quite what pharmacological approach you could take.
There are a number of medications that have been trialled for it. It's quite difficult to see the effect of some of these medications on the Menieres in people because the disease is like migraine. You get a horrible run of it, and then it can go away, what we call a period of remission for several months or even years. Then it comes back again. So you don't know if that remission was due to your treatment or just a natural remission.
Have you ever been able to study a patient during an attack?
Yes.
So
Yes,
they've
definitely.
got to you quickly enough, or it's happened perchance while they're in your company?
Yeah, I think it's really important to study them during the attacks because this gives the key to what's going on.
Yeah.
They get some very interesting symptoms. They get a thing called nystagmus, where their eyes are darting from side to side. As they feel they're going around in a circle, their eyes drift in the direction they think they're moving and then jerk back suddenly, and it's called nystagmus.
Can they control that if you ask them to fix on the horizon, so like on a sea,
they can, but
a rocking boat or something?
Not everybody likes to do that because it can bring on the nausea and the vomiting when you start to do that. So often people just shut their eyes, and you can actually see their eyes flicking through their eyelids if it's a strong attack. The interesting thing is the direction of that nystagmus changes from the beginning of attack to the end of an attack. And that's one of the keys, is why should it change direction? And that's one of the things we're working on.
You mean as if they're spinning one direction for a moment and then they're spinning
it goes the other way. That's very odd. So one of the ideas is, instead of observing people, we need to produce an animal model so that we can see in an animal exactly what's going on. And nobody's been able to do this
Do
in
we
the world.
know whether animals get Menieres?
They don't. They can get too much fluid in the ear, but they don't get these attacks of vertigo. So that's the strange thing, and that's why we need to definitely find out what the relationship is.
What questions does that make you ask, knowing that it doesn't happen in animals but it does in humans? And presumably their inner ear is sort of
it's not
architecturally
different.
not much different from ours.
I think the problem is the drainage mechanism of the ear is not working properly in human beings, and I think of the volume change that occurs in the ear can be quite sudden. So the human beings are getting a sudden surge of fluid in their ear, and this is activating their balance mechanism till it subsides.
Gosh, that's interesting, Bill. I was just wondering about grommets. You know how some people have their kids, when they have kids with glue ear or something. Do people still do this? They did it when I had children.
There's lots of kids with grommets. In America, it's meant to be the commonest operation.
Really?
Costing trillions of dollars a year to the health budget. We're a little bit more restricted in Australia. We try to leave the grommets until we know the kids really, really need them.
Yeah, but that doesn't have an application in what we're talking about.
Oh, yes, it does, because the fullness sensation in the ear can be really annoying, this feeling that the ear's constantly blocked.
Yeah.
That can often be helped by a grommet. And there's been a study in Sweden where they found that if they put small pressure waves into the ear through the grommet, that pressure wave will go into the inner ear and gently pulse the fluids in the inner ear and help to disperse some of the fluid. And it's called a Meniere device, and it's actually, for some people in the early stages of the disease, it's been quite successful.
You and I we've talked on a couple of occasions about the bionic ear, as it's so called, the cochlear implant. Is there an application for cochlear implant in Menieres patients once they've reached the burnout phase?
Yes, at the moment, if they should get it in both ears, which God forbid, but it does happen sometimes, then the cochlear implant is a very viable option. And one of the great things is the implant has worked extremely well in these people.
Has it?
Yes.
Even in people of advanced years?
Oh, yes. Well, we've used the implant in people up to, the oldest person was in their 90s that I've done.
You're kidding?
Yes. And
I thought it was all children, or mostly children.
No.
Really?
Sylvia, who's our oldest recipient, is now about 98, and she goes to the ballet every month. And my wife goes to the ballet, and they often meet up there. And she's a character. She used to do Meals on Wheels.
Really?
Up into her 90s for the oldies.
Yes, because she probably said everybody's so old.
She was worried about losing her licence.
Wow. The cochlear implant is a very interesting story. Where's it up to? How's it going in Australia now?
Well, from the early days when we really battled everybody, where there was a lot of scepticism, Graham Clark, as you know, developed the implant, and he took a battering. We got a battering not only from people who were deaf, who felt that sign language was their right and that they were a community and this was invading it. no longer do they feel so threatened, which is wonderful. You know, we're all on the same side now, which is wonderful. We got attacked by some of the professionals, the people who used to teach the deaf children, the audiologists, etc., and even by colleagues who felt that this was a stupid way to do research. So those were early battling days. Now it's the norm. If a child is born deaf, or if somebody becomes so deaf they can't use a hearing aid any longer, it's accepted that a cochlear implant will give them their hearing. And if we can put the implant into a child below the age of 2, we can pretty well guarantee that child will go through a regular school situation.
Really?
And have the same opportunity as any other child.
But how young's the youngest that you've seen?
With a cochlear implant in our group is 3 months.
3 months?
Yeah.
What are all newborn babies hearing tested at birth?
That was another wonderful thing. That Craig Knowles, when he was minister, decided we should have universal screening of all children at birth.
This is in New South Wales?
In New South Wales. And New South Wales, I think, led the world almost in this. So we developed an automated ABR, which is to measure the waves that come from the brain. And every child in a private or public hospital, and it's about 97% coverage in New South Wales, has this test at birth. And we know then if a child has a profound hearing loss. So we know from literally about the second day of their life whether there's a hearing loss
and
present.
Then they can have an operation before the age of 3 months, or at the,
if it's indicated,
to have a
yes.
cochlear implant. And presumably the brain of the developing brain of the infant is plastic enough to be able to adjust to that.
Absolutely, yes. They can go down the same track as a hearing child. 3 months is a bit exceptional, but we are aiming to do them between 6 and 9 months.
Wow.
Because the skull has to grow, and it's much easier to do.
How many are done? I mean, is it one every year or more frequently?
Oh, no. It's more frequent than that. In our group, the Sydney Cochlear Implant Centre, the centre I set up, which is now at Gladesville. We've got an outpost at Canberra, Newcastle and Gosford, so we've got centres now growing everywhere. We did over 300 last year.
And is it happening around the country? Because people are listening to this around the country.
Absolutely. Every state now has cochlear implant centres, and most states now do the SWISH, the statewide infant screening of hearing program. So that's now available in all states. So we are now detecting the children.
Magic stuff, isn't it? Why have you chosen... Oh, Gondwana Voices. Is your grandson in this choir?
2 grandchildren in it, yes. So Jack was the first to go in and was in Voices and was part of this recording you're going to hear. And his brother Sam Begbie has joined Gondwana as well.
Okay.
Gondwana was set up by Lynn Williams, and it's her 21st birthday anniversary on July the 4th.
Wonderful.
Yep.
So here we hear a piece of music by Elena Katz-Chernin called Deep Sea Dreaming. Deep Sea Dreaming by Elena Katz-Chernin. That was Gondwana Voices, containing 2 of the grandsons of our guest today, Bill Gibson, his grandsons Jack and Sam Begbie, and they were conducted there by Lynn Williams. Bill, your accent betrays your origins.
Oh, yes.
You're from... You never lose an accent, do you?
And I've never tried to either.
You were born in England?
I was born in Devon.
Yeah.
Which is part of southwest corner of England. When I go back to Devon, apparently I pick up my Devon accent.
Oh, do you? Do I remember correctly you were twins? twin? You were one of twins?
I've got a twin brother, Bob,
Yeah.
who came out to Australia in front of me and married an Australian. That's the reason I'm here, really, because Bob married an Australian.
Is he an identical twin?
Yes.
Right.
And we came out to visit him, and we decided that this was better than where we were, I must admit. And then there was a job at Sydney University, so everything fell in place.
Tell me about the family you and Bob came from then. What did the family do?
Well, my father was a family doctor in Devon and ran a practice, so I was brought up in the medical field, and I must admit that even as a kid I never imagined doing anything other than medicine.
Really?
It was always there.
What about your twin? Is he a doctor too?
No, he went into estate management. He ran a company called Burgess Rawson, which sells commercial real estate. He's just retired, actually.
Okay.
And he plays a lot of golf now.
Now, how did you come to specialise in otolaryngology?
Otolaryngology.
Laryngology, you say. Otolaryngology.
Yes, from the Greek. But I really do ears, just otology now, rather than the throat.
So oto means ears, larynx.
Otos is Greek.
And
for,
larynx is larynx,
and
so
rhinos.
It's like ear, nose and throat, is it ENT?
That's it, yes. Well, I started wanting to do surgery, I decided, when I was a medical student. I thought I liked the idea of surgery. And I looked at orthopaedics, and general surgery didn't really appeal. It's all a little bit abdominal and everything. And then looked at orthopaedics, and then I thought, the neck's very interesting area. I'll do ENT because I can do neck surgery. But as soon as I got into that, I suddenly realised that the ear was an absolutely fascinating area. And it was the time when everything was happening. You know, we had stapedectomies, cochlear implants, everything beginning to blossom. And
Who turned you onto ears then? Was it just accidental that you...
Well, I started doing ENT and then just drifted towards ears because that was just such an interesting area.
Why is it so interesting to you, Bill?
Because it was evolving. It wasn't more than about 50 years ago when people said that if you were deaf, there was nothing that could be done. That was it. You know, you were deaf, and the hearing aids and things were like tubes and things that you could put to your ears. They had old valve sets that you could hang around your neck. There was very little that you could do for most ear conditions. Then suddenly they learnt how to successfully graft eardrums, how to put new bones in the ear, how to do stapedectomies. And then the most fantastic thing of all was Graham Clark's work and finding out that we can actually implant prostheses to make people hear. And then there's a number of diseases like Menieres disease that is absolutely intriguing because nobody's found the reason why people have Menieres disease or what causes it or how effectively to treat it. So there's challenges galore.
When will we know those things? When is research going on as we, now into this?
Well, this has been the latest venture in a way. We've set up this Menieres Research Fund, and we've managed to get a beautiful laboratory set up in the Brain and Mind Research Institute at the University of Sydney. Got a fantastic researcher called Daniel Brown, who's a PhD, who's trained in Perth and then went to the States and then's come back to us. So we've set up this lab. We've got everything going now, and it's the first place, I think, worldwide that's really dedicated just to trying to find the cause of Menieres disease. So,
and do you have people who have Menieres come there and submit themselves to experiments of some kind, or?
Yeah, well, we're doing some of the work I do in my offices where we're looking at new ways of testing for Menieres disease using emissions from the ear rather than having to put probes down the ear canal. Mm-hmm. We're also looking at trying to set up this animal model so that we can find out why people get dizziness who have Menieres disease. So we've got this chap called Bruce Kirkpatrick, who's fantastic, who's been the driving force and raised all the funds to get it going so far.
You know how you said back in our conversation that you can't operate to drain those chambers because you destroy the hearing. Is that set in cement and will never be different?
Oh, I hope it will be different.
I'm just wondering whether your neurologist friends come into the picture and discover how they can maintain the the hearing nerve,
The cochlea.
the cochlea. Well, how they can maintain that without stop that being damaged
When you penetrate
actually
the membranes.
yes.
Yes. I'm sure one day they'll do that.
How will they do that? I mean, that's
Well, we have to maintain the composition of the fluids and put a very tiny... we're looking at very tiny structures here.
nanotechnology.
Yes,
almost,
exactly. Yes.
isn't it?
So to get that in and then to get rid of the fluid, but we need to know why they make the fluid. That's important.
So if you know
and then
why...
yes, and then we could stop them making the fluid,
Yeah.
or why they're not draining the fluid, and we make sure they do drain it properly.
It strikes me that this sort of research is almost as much... it's as much about imagination as anything else, isn't it? Imagining... sort of having an imagination of what should be possible.
I agree. I think you do have to think outside the box if we're going to find a cure. It's no good just going along the same old tracks. We need to go in different directions.
For instance, have studies been done of Meniere's sufferers, a very detailed study of their genetic background, their lifestyle, their physical makeup, the structure of their actual inner ears, all of that? Has any sort of
To a certain degree,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, definitely. We have found on chromosome 8 and chromosome 10, a lot of sufferers have slight abnormalities there, so that's been picked up. The structure of the ear is the drainage duct is usually more narrow in Menieres than in the normal ear. So that's interesting in itself. Although there are people that have narrow ducts that don't get Menieres disease. So we're going round in circles in a way, but I feel that with a little bit of effort and everything and support, we should be able to make some roads into this mysterious disease.
The Spooky Men's Choir.
Yes.
Come on.
Well, I'm a great fan of Hilaire Belloc, you see, and all his poems about Matilda and, Rebecca and everybody else. But Jim was one of my favourite ones, and I tell it to my grandchildren because I actually know it by heart, as I know you know it by heart
it too,
as well.
yes, from school.
And there's certain stages of it where the lion springs and we could get, the children would jump up in the air.
Okay.
So it's a big memory for me.
Listen to this.
His mother, as she dried her eyes, said, "Well, it gives me no surprise. He would not do as he was told." His father, who was self-controlled, bade all the children round attend to James's miserable end. And always keep a hold of nurse, for fear of finding something worse. Always keep a hold of nurse, for fear of finding something worse.
Yes.
Oh, gosh, I remember that. The poem Jim by Hilaire Belloc and given music by Stephen Taberner and sung there by the Spooky Men's Choir and chosen by our guest, Professor Bill Gibson. We haven't got a lot of time, Bill, but I do want to find when you're away from Menieres and the doctor's sort of doctoring in your life, what do you like to do?
Well, one of my hobbies is fishing, and I have a great friend, Mike Cook, and we love going out and catching fish.
And do you catch fish?
Oh, he's very good. He usually points me in the right direction. We go up to Foster, we fish from there,
Yeah.
and also out the heads at Sydney. I've got a boat at Birchgrove.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I'm thrilled to hear that the cochlear implant has progressed so well. It's really wonderful news, and thank you for sort of telling us all about Menieres. It's really interesting stuff.
Yes, and if anybody's interested, we've got a good website now for the Menieres Research Fund. So if they Google it, they can find out how to be involved. We're with Balmain Rotary, we're going to run a fundraiser. So if you go to the site, just Google it.
Menieres.
You'll hear all about it.
Okay, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And your final piece is The Canon by Pachelbel. Tell me, why?
Well, it's just a favourite. It's a favourite of both my wife and my own. It's about the only thing you really wrote, but it was fantastic, wasn't it?
It's beautiful.
It's a classic.
The final choice of Professor Bill Gibson, Pachelbel's Canon. It was performed by the Tasmanian Symphony Chamber Players. Professor Gibson was talking about Menieres disease, among other things. And for more information on that disease, you can go to the following website if you have internet access, www.healthinsight.gov.au. And from there you can type in Menieres disease, and that will take you to Professor Gibson's paper on the disease. Menieres disease, Menieres. Tomorrow, James Rhodes. He's an acclaimed British pianist. He's being hailed as one of the classical world's most exciting new musicians, and his concert tour begins in Melbourne at the Melbourne Festival on Wednesday the 19th of October. He then plays concerts in Sydney, Canberra, Brisbane and Adelaide, and he's our repeat interview tomorrow here on ABC Classic FM with Stephen Snellman. Just Classics after the news, 11 o'clock now.
This feature was produced by ABC Classic FM. You'll find more audio of our programs, along with special features for download, on our website at abc.net.au/classic/audio.